Today's case is one that I've covered before, quite some time ago, but I wanted to go into it in more depth. It's one close to my heart and one which, if you stick to the end, you'll see has similarities with the Kiely Rodden case. This is the case of Alna Maria Peterson, who was known to her family as Valerie. On May the 6th, 1971, Valerie was 8 years old. She was the youngest in a family of 3 children, with an older brother and sister. Her sister Eileen remembers that Thursday morning as being a somewhat rushed one. They were running late for school, so she rushed out to the car with no goodbyes, nor looking back at her younger sister, who she sadly never saw alive again. After school that day, Valerie was outside the Manson, Iowa, Augustana Lutheran Church, where her mother worked, enjoying being outside and riding bikes with her close friend. Manson, Iowa was a small, safe town where everyone knew everybody else, so the girls felt perfectly safe riding their bikes along the road. Hearing the sound of an approaching pickup truck, Valerie's friend warned her of its approach and told her to move off the road. Valerie, having heard the warning and being somewhat accustomed to such a routine, moved well off to the side of the road. Shortly after, a blue-green pickup truck appeared heading north at a significant speed. Its 3 male occupants having just left the local pub where they had been drinking quite heavily. Everything happened in a split second. An examination of the crime scene afterwards showed that there were tyre marks in the dirt where the truck had intentionally veered off the road, where, without slowing down, it subsequently struck Valerie, who was thrown up into the air, and then hit the truck again on the front or side before striking the ground. She most likely died instantly. The truck didn't slow down or stop, but instead fled the scene. The FBI and the Criminal Bureau of Investigation, CBI, suspected one family in particular who were known to own a blue-green truck. So they went to the family's home within 1 hour following the fatal hit and run. The family was somewhat wealthy, quite well known in the Manson area, and one of the sons was home on leave from the military at the time. The suspect's neighbours told officials the pickup truck had arrived home within the past hour and had been driven into the garage at a high speed. Within that same hour, a member of the suspect's family had thoroughly washed the pickup truck. Later that same day, the suspect's family drove him to Fort Dodge and put him on a plane to return him early from his leave to the US Army. On the same evening, after investigators had finished processing the scene of the crime, someone then went there and made skid marks in the road in an attempt to make it appear as if someone had tried to stop before hitting Valerie. The marks had, of course, not been there during the crime scene investigation. A few days after the homicide, the suspect's family sold the truck to Rost Motors in Manson. Valerie's father got wind of this, so he notified investigators, who went and collected paint scrapings from beneath the truck. The paint scrapings and initial evidence taken from the scene was sent to Washington, D.C. for testing, but were unfortunately destroyed in an attempt to test them, since testing methods used at the time were still in their infancy. Apparently no additional paint scrapings were preserved for later testing or future evidentiary purposes. In the years following Valerie's death, her family continued to press officials for updates on her case. They also, on 2 separate occasions, offered rewards for information that could lead to an arrest. However, no one came forward and both rewards went unclaimed. In 1989, a new sheriff, Bill Davis, was elected in Calhoun County. Bill had been the same age as Valerie when she was killed and had heard his parents talk about what happened quite often. So when he was approached by Valerie's family with a request to revisit the case, he was happy to do so. Davis believed that the evidence all seemed to point to the one man from the influential family who had continued living in the same community after the incident. The problem, however, was that when Davis tried to track down the physical evidence, as in Valerie's bicycle, her clothing, backpack, books and other items, he discovered that at some time during the 80s, all the evidence had been thrown out. The excuse being that the statute of limitations for a hit-and-run crime had run out. Apparently they ignored the fact that it also was considered a red rum, given that Valerie actually died. Peterson's family had never been notified that the evidence was going to be destroyed and didn't find out that everything was gone until Davis began his investigation. Officials said it had been so long and nothing had happened, so they discarded the evidence. Yeah, I bet that's the reason. With the evidence destroyed, Davis apparently handed over the file to an FBI agent for investigation. But it appears that the case was once again put aside and left to go cold. So, Manson, Iowa is one of those close-knit rural communities where residents know each other on a first-name basis, and they all frequent their local businesses. So, in every house, people knew what happened. They knew who was responsible. Everybody knew everything. But publicly, no one knew anything. It was better to not get involved and play it safe, particularly when prestigious community members are allegedly involved. Does that sound a bit familiar? In 2010, Eileen Meyer and her brother Cal Peterson, so that's Valerie's siblings, established the Valerie Peterson Memorial Justice Scholarship at the Manson Northwest Webster Senior High School. And this scholarship was to provide a student from the high school who planned to study and make a career in law enforcement, criminal forensics or law with that little bit of extra money to help them to do so. But despite what was on offer, there were no applicants. The parents basically felt that they didn't want to make waves and have their own children dredging up a community's unfortunate past. So there was deafening silence. Nobody applied for the scholarship. And because of that, the Peterson family quietly withdrew it. In an article posted on the Iowa Cold Cases website titled Breaking Through the Walls of Silence and Shame, and I will put links for all these below, Valerie's sister Eileen spoke of the silence of store clerks when her brother took her to a shop for a black dress, of going back to school for the final week and no one saying anything, almost as if she'd been out with a cold, of being told by a law officer that the only thing that could be done against the person who killed her sister was for them to issue a traffic ticket. That's wrong, Eileen wrote. My sister was not powerful or influential, but a human being who deserves justice and whose life was worth more than a traffic ticket. So in July of this year, a new statewide cold case unit was formed, which will work towards closing more than 400 cold cases which currently exist in Iowa. So this week I emailed them to ask if Valerie's case is on their books, and I received the following reply. Thank you for your interest in cold cases in Iowa. The Attorney General's statewide cold case unit is in its development stage and not yet in place, should be soon. Once investigators are hired, and with the over 400 cold cases in Iowa, the next step will be to review, prioritise and investigate the identified cold cases. This will be done in conjunction with the law enforcement agency and county attorney's office that has the original cold case. In this case, our coordination will be with the Calhoun County Sheriff and Calhoun County Attorney. Your information will be saved and processed. Thank you again for taking the time to contact us. So, I'm not sure if that's a promising reply, but at least I've drawn their attention to the case. So, this case shares the similarity with Kiely's case of these communities that are prepared to protect a killer at the expense of an innocent victim, just because the killer comes from an important family. That unwillingness or the taboo when it comes to discussing the case within the community, a desire not to be involved. In June of 1979, 8 years after Valerie's death, Manson, Iowa, was all but destroyed by a tornado that ripped through the town, killing 3 people and destroying hundreds of homes. Was this karma for their silence in the face of evil? Is there some kind of disaster in Truckie's future for their role in denying justice for Kiely? Were it not for an article on the Iowa Cold Cases webpage, Valerie Peterson would almost certainly have been forgotten and justice never served. I personally intend on keeping Valerie's name out there. I will continue to make contact with the Iowa Cold Case Unit to push for her case to be reopened. I'm also working on a FOIA request, although discovering the whereabouts of the files from Valerie's case could be a challenge. I am determined that at the very least that I will discover the name of the man responsible for the death of this little 8-year-old girl and tell it to the world. Thankfully for Kiely, there's modern technology, which means there will always be information available about Kiely's case. And even if those of us who've been fighting for justice for Kiely have to step down at some point in time, the information will be there for those who come after and choose to take up the fight. That said, let's hope that we don't have to wait 53 years till some cold case unit decides to reopen her case and name the person or persons responsible for Kiely's death.